This is embarrassing, actually,
All right.
because I'm on the advisory board of Montrose Lane.
Yeah.
We're a shareholder and all.
Yeah.
What the hell does Novi Labs do?
Yeah. Well, great question. Great place to start.
It's like, this is going to be edgy. I'm going to call all the portfolio companies in to figure this out.
Yeah. So really, we're a data analytics company focused on unconventionals in lower 48. We have two main business lines. One is that we have machine learning based forecasting tools for operators to design their developments. So, how many wells should I drill in this section in Martin County? Should I increase my completion design? Like, what's the optimal for rate of return or maximize your NPV or whatever it happens to be that they're looking at? And then second,
is that like Aries on steroids? I mean, dummy it down for the finance guy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, Aries, you might group your wells together, fit some curves to it. That's all done by a human reservoir engineer, and they are subject to different biases. They can only hold a few things in their brain at once. I
worked in private equity. Yeah. Their deals were doing well. That's how it always came in.
Yeah.
A B factor of 3? I don't think that actually exists, but okay, sure. Yeah.
Whereas the machine learning model, it can look across the entire basin for analogs. It can be very deliberate in analyzing all these different factors. And at the end of the day, what that means is you get a more accurate forecast and a better decision. So, maybe a reservoir engineer doing it by hand says, hey, we need to pump 2,900 pounds per foot. But in reality, you're overcapitalizing your well and you're, leaving $1 million on the table just by putting all that down hole. So the model can help you identify places to get better economics out of your developments.
Because, it felt like towards the last, so I get booted, call it April 2020.
Yeah.
So I want to say maybe as early as 2016, 2017. We were really doing a lot of that mechanically by hand of, okay, let's drill a well and let's pump, 2/3 of the proppant or whatever. And we were trying to be very methodical and testing every variable individually. And what we always found would happen is, okay, we all agree we're just going to test the sand on this one. And inevitably, the ops engineer, to save some money, would also do something else. And we'd be like, now we don't know what it means.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. Plus, if you drill 6 wells on a pad, the 4 interior wells, their production might go up or down 20% just for no reason, even if you do the exact same thing, right? So with all of that and all of the craziness on, hey, they decided to cut a stage or whatever it is, by looking across many different examples, you can get a better answer for whatever you're trying to look at, rather than just, putting all your faith on one science pad for your cluster design or whatever it is. Yeah.
And so last thing while we're on Novi Labs, if I'm a customer, is it a SaaS model? I'm buying software and data from you. How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a SaaS model, usually 1 or 3 year deals. We will, depending on the size of the company and how many licenses you need, things like that, will scale the price up or down.
Gotcha.
All the data is included along with that.
Gotcha. And I have one of the greatest data stories of all time. And the person who did this shall remain nameless, Ryan Rice. Supposedly, don't know this to be true, Toby marches down the hall at Rice Energy and goes, Ryan, we've got 4 different data sets. Pick one. I'm not spending $1 million on data. Just pick one and let's go with it. The next board meeting, Ryan is passing out the board books, and Toby notices that Ryan is passing out 4 different books. They're looking at an acquisition or a development program or whatever. 4 different books. Toby goes, hey, what's the deal with the 4 books? Well, I have 4 different data sets right now. We're going to look at each one, and I just want you to tell me which data set I need to get rid of. By the way, the results vary by 50% across all 4 data sets.
I believe it. Yeah.
Is that true about data? And how do y'all deal with that?
Yes, it's definitely true about data, although it does vary depending on which state you're in.
Okay.
So if you're in North Dakota and you look at a deal and you're using 4 different data sets, you're not going to have a 50% discrepancy in the valuation. But if you're in Texas or West Virginia or Pennsylvania, you might. And the biggest driver of that, especially in the Texas Permian or the Eagle Ford, is the production data for the state is reported at the lease level rather than at the well level. So let's say you're evaluating a deal in Howard County, and the operators have been, the operator in the area that you're looking at has been drilling 20 wells a section, and you think, hey, I think there's potential here in the Wolfcamp B that's maybe not really tapped so far, and we can add in an extra 4 wells to their developments. You're using guesstimated production for what the Wolfcamp B does in that area, because all you know is how much the whole lease produces. So companies like Novi will have to come up with an estimation for how much of the whole lease level production belongs to each of the individual wells. So we spent a lot of time on that, and we've also, and this is something pretty unique, gone out to minerals companies and operators and started licensing their well level data directly. So rather than having to deal with like these guesstimations, you get, the ground truth, like straight from the source, basically.
So when I would sit there and either my guys or portfolio company CEO would pick up the phone and call me and say, we have to buy this 1% interest in this area, they weren't bullshitting me. They were doing it because they wanted actual data.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it, because if you're getting that data from your check stubs or working interest data share, you actually know how much the wells are producing, which is like extremely valuable to know.
Yeah, we used to do that, and where it really mattered was when you could also get the completion card and know exactly what completion recipe they used.
Yeah.
And you could start differentiating by wells on that.
Yeah.
That actually really mattered.
Yeah, exactly. And in Texas, for the most part, you don't know how many stages they pump. You don't have any idea about the clusters, and that can have a big impact on the performance as well. And that's another thing we've and maybe you heard about this from the Montrose guys, but we run this Novi data network that allows operators to share their stage data and cluster data for training models. So, maybe you're operating in Reeves County or Midland County or whatever, and you've only tried 2 different stage lengths. And you're like, well, what happens if we do shorter stages or longer stages? Like, who knows? But you pool all your data with other operators who've tried other things, and now the model can tell you, oh yeah, you can increase production 5% if you shorten your stages by 75 feet or whatever.
I've got friends that are software engineers.
Yeah.
That, periodically call and go, okay, let me get this straight. You guys go out and spend $250 million on 2 sections of land and drill 24 wells, and you turn it all on, and you don't know if you're going to make money or not make money. And you do that without calling the guy next door. Oh yeah. We might give away a secret. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
I actually love to hear the it's not open source, but to some degree, open source doing it. Because we all have that deal that we made gazillion dollars on because we had some information, and we've given it back 10 times by not sharing, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think what everyone is realizing is we're not in this, offshore lease sale mode where the value of the acreage can swing 100x based on some well result. And so you need to be secret agents with super crazy protocols with all your data. And in fact, by collaborating more and having more openness, the rising tide can lift all boats, and everyone in the area can have improved performance and returns and all that.
So this is a weird juxtaposition, but it just kind of came to me on this. Sorry, I have ADD.
Go for it.
Whatever. Yeah. You're significantly younger than I am. Do you think part of the reason we have such trouble attracting young people is because we're so close-minded and not? It feels like this is gonna be a little derogatory. I don't mean it, but if you grew up with participation trophies and you're not sharing, do you really want to go hang out with these guys?
Oh man,
is there any truth to that? Maybe
I don't. That's a good question, but I think that the more of the younger generation, my cohort graduating in, the mid 2010s, and then folks who are graduating over the next 10 years, I think it's more about the volatility of the job market and just worrying about the future of oil and gas. Like, even if it's a person who isn't immediately like throwing up in their mouth at the thought of working in an oil and gas company, because that is a huge portion of it. And I'll go talk to undergrads at UT, geology students, and they'll just be like, I'm not working in oil and gas.
My 3 kids live the greatest. My 3 kids are going to London for Christmas. Yeah. Should we ban oil and gas? Oh, yes, Dad. It's so evil.
Yeah. What's fueling the plane on their way over there? You want to row your way? Yeah.
Exactly.
Sailboat?
You're going to be warm in that polyester coat. Yeah. Exactly. So, okay. You just gave a really cool speech about the DJ Basin.
Yes.
What did you say in it? Because it was cool. I've read the slides. I don't want to give spoiler alert. I'll let you deliver it, but it was cool.
Yeah. So I was recently at the Society of Petroleum Engineers Denver chapter, which shout out to SPE, great organization, still going strong. But if you look across all the major shale plays here in the United States, and let's focus on the oil plays, Permian, Eagle Ford, Williston, Anadarko, DJ, Powder River, even throw it in there. Almost all of those plays have had declining well productivity over the last couple of years. Yep. So a Permian well that was drilled in 2020 or 2021 was 10% more productive than the wells that are being drilled over the last 12 months. And
I've got a theory on that, but we'll when we get to the Permian, we'll put a
bow on that one.
Yeah.
And if you look, that's pretty consistent across the different basins, with the exception of the DJ, which has had the opposite trend, where it has gone up 10% over the last couple of years. And so obviously this is interesting. It's an anomaly in the data. Things are breaking trend. And there's a couple things going on in the DJ that I think are interesting and are maybe things to think about for other basins. But one of them is that the basin is consolidating. So 75% of production now is Oxy, Chevron, and Civitas. Just 3 operators, right? And it's by far the most concentrated of the major shale plays. So will a basin which has fewer larger operators have different production? Maybe. The other thing is it's a challenging surface environment. Getting permits is tough. You're drilling in the suburbs. It's challenging from a lot of reasons. You have the political uncertainty of will the next election remove your ability to drill some wells. And so what we did is we took our machine learning models and we ran them on the DJ Basin to try and see if we could figure out like what is driving this productivity increase, and can we tie that back to any of the circumstances that are in that basin. And really what we found is kind of a 3-pronged recipe for how the operators there are increasing the performance. And it's not by focusing on better quality rock. It's the biggest driver is actually pumping more fluid in their completions jobs.
Okay.
So they have gone from pumping an average of 25 barrels a foot up to an average of 40 barrels a foot in just a couple of years, which is a tremendous increase.
Right.
So they had been stable for years and years and years. And the operators kind of figured out that this was a big deal. And our models think that you can still get a lot more oil for a 40 barrel a foot job compared to a 25. And now 40 barrels a foot would be more like a Permian size job than where the DJ used to be. So that's like the biggest difference. But they're also drilling longer laterals, and they're being more aggressive than the Permian players. They're drilling more, 2.5 to 3+ mile laterals. And then they're doing wider spacing. So it's this interesting recipe where you pump a bigger job, you widen out your spacing, you drill longer laterals, and that's unlocking this nice productivity gain there, which I think like between the pressure on the operators to get the best out of what they have and a little bit of the longer term planning focus that some of these bigger operators have. Clearly, they're in the play to stay. Is why we're seeing these gains affected there compared to other basins.
Okay, let's break this down. So, number one question, and they're going to be all over the place. Sorry about that. How are we defining better rock? What metrics are you using to define rock?
Yeah. So we are using our machine learning models, taking in rock properties like TOC, water saturation, thickness, depth, the clay content of the rock, and the models can learn from that how those different factors drive the performance. So our models can come up with really accurate maps of rock quality that are done in a data-driven way. It tends to be very robust and predictive, and you're not like assuming like I need to have 3.5% TOC, because a lot of that stuff breaks down and when you actually get onto the ground. So the models basically learn, hey, the rock quality is better here, it's worse here. This area is more gas prone, this area is more water prone, et cetera, et cetera.
So thinking that one through, and I know we're talking about a whole basin, multiple formations, so could be your answer. Do you find in the DJ Basin that the metrics that matter or the variables that matter have a tendency to be linear? Because one of the things we got tripped up on is we actually found some plays where it was binary. You needed X amount. You needed 25 feet. You needed X amount of TOC, whatever. And you had a great well if you had less than that. The analogy I always give is you look at offensive linemen in the NFL, and it's 280 pounds. There is not very rare that you find a great offensive lineman less than 280 pounds, but it's not linear. 330 pounds is not better than 290. Yeah. It's more binary. What does the rock look like in the DJ?
Yeah, we see these nonlinear relationships all the time. And usually we'll find something like, let's say depth might be linear. Like you might get more productivity the deeper you are. And that might be
more
very
pressure.
linear.
Look at that.
Exactly. Yeah. I know. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. Thank you, machine learning model.
Yeah, exactly. Even the finance guy got that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But other things, like a lot of times the clay volume, maybe it doesn't matter at all until you get above 25% clay. Like that'd be a very common thing. We're having 5% or 15%, no difference. Going over that threshold, then it starts to degrade.
Yeah.
Same thing with TOC. A lot of times we'll see a similar kind of step change. Or water saturation.
Another theory on the DJ, because of the regulatory environment, because of man-made stuff up above the ground, and I don't even know how we would measure this, but did we drill more parent-type wells because of surface? And that just explains why things are better. Because I think a lot of our problem when we get to the Permian and some other basins is we fucked up parent-child.
Yeah.
I mean, we just did. We as we were discussing earlier, we didn't share notes and we messed that up.
Yeah, we do see that the DJ compared to the Permian has less impact from parent-child relations, like definitely.
Okay.
And I don't know. I'll have to go back and check the data. I don't know how much of that is just like the nature of the play versus operator design choices and how they actually develop the units. But it's much less of an impact up in the DJ compared to the Permian. And we see the bigger impact from the recent impact is due to like wider lateral spacing between wells and their neighbors, either wine racked above them or in the same subzone.
And I wonder if that's not driven by, at least in part by, in Colorado, it felt like you could just get 100,000 acres and, you have these big federal tracts.
Yep.
And you could go, wow, this is great. And I always thought that's why Denver was so gentlemanly. Because if you have 100,000 acres, I'd like a piece of your deal. Sure,
Yeah.
you can have 20,000 acres.
Yeah.
Where in Oklahoma and parts of the Permian, oh my God, that 3 acres are mine, and they fight about it. And, you get the concentration of ownership, which led to tighter spacing, et cetera. I wonder if there's any of that going on.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think the other component of that is there's probably more pressure to build out contiguous blocks just because of how surface constrained it is. So maybe operators are more willing to trade acreage so that they can both drill 10,000-foot wells. I'm just arm waving here.
Yeah, no, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think up in, this is also outside of my bailiwick here, but up in Canada where you have other surficial issues for other, like more of environmental regulations and things like that, you probably see similar things going on.
This used to always be our deal. It took us a while. If you called for references on anyone in Denver, you always got 10 out of 10. Uh-huh. Everybody was fine. And then you'd get in there and you go, oh my God, this guy's an idiot or whatever and all this. Where Oklahoma, the best you could do is 7 good references out of 10. And when you trace down the 3 or more bad references, it was always because somebody force pulled somebody.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with quality of human. It was just, it's just,
that's great.
It's the Game of Thrones they play in Oklahoma.
Yeah. It's a different world out there. That's for sure. Yeah.
So what else do we know about the DJ that might be explaining this? I mean, this is going to pain me to say it, but I'll go ahead and say it. So Chevron, a major, is actually pretty good at drilling. I mean, is that what we're actually saying?
Yeah, potentially, yes. I mean, I think when we have been looking at this, not just in the DJ but around the country, a lot of the big dogs are drilling pretty productive wells, and I think they probably suffer more on their cost models, but they spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out the right design for their wells. And I think for, the key question I have about whether or not the, DJ Renaissance can repeat in the Permian as Exxon takes it all over, or, whoever takes it all over is there a nickel line on the sidewalk in the case of operators under completing their wells, or have collectively the hundreds of operators out there kind of already figured out what you need to do.
Yeah. Because that's basically, you've played into something when we start talking about the Permian that I'll talk about. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think you really are just going to have 3 or 4 operators in DJ because you have to have an oligopoly to deal with the government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the way it's going to operate. The other thing that we've got to give the DJ credit for too is when it comes to carbon emissions, methane emissions, and all that.
Yeah.
Better than other basins too.
Yeah, definitely shout out to them for that. We all, I don't want to see our precious North American resource being flared, more than anybody else, acknowledging that wells need to be economic, but I'd rather capture that and use it for making plastics,
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. The part of that speech, as I was flipping through slides, you did talk about machine learning, or you talked about the AI learnings. Kind of anything pop out at the DJ that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I think we hit most of the major things, but the other slightly unique thing going on there is just how the lateral length efficiency there seems to be better than another place, and I'm not quite sure what the exact mechanism is that's driving that, but I think that's part of what has enabled the productivity for those long laterals. Is just for whatever reservoir reason it works pretty well. Maybe it's something about the fluid content, or who knows, but it seems to look better than the Permian for a 15K versus a 10K versus a 5K.
Yeah. So one last question on the DJ before we leave. Anything out there lurking as potentially a step change function up, or this is as good as it's going to get?
I mean, we didn't like just looking through the different trends that the model has seen, like other than finishing up the transition to higher fluid intensities, I don't think there's anything else that's like at least laying around in the data from what we have. But that doesn't mean that there's not other things out there that we just don't really have data for. You know, data analytics is fantastic, but it is backwards looking by its nature. So,
Right.
you know, who knows what other things people might discover out there. You know, like for instance, they tend to be, over the past couple of years, operators have been drilling more outside of the Wattenberg core, you know, and they've been finding nice little productive pockets in other parts of the play. I will say this one thing: our models. This is a fun little side. This is the Chuck Yates needs a job podcast aside, but the rock underneath Denver would be incredibly productive if we could actually drill it. It looks like as good as anything else in the rest of the play.
If we could disguise it as a dispensary, we'd be able to drill anywhere in downtown Denver.
That's one of those things. Yeah, put it behind the dispensary. The DJ, the Niobrara under Denver, the Marcellus under Pittsburgh. There's a few places out there where there's like really productive rock, which is just, you know, fails under the surface conditions. So, you know, World War III kicks up and we need some extra resource. You know, you can go into a parking lot in Coors Field and get some nice returns.
The Illuminati is underneath the airport there, right? Isn't that the story? So they're near the resource.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, smart lizards, you know.
There was a I'm blanking on the name of the company. The CEO's name was Dick Lewis. Great guy. And he told the story of leasing the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And so they basically go out to bid and he's studying it, and it's trouble getting data from the city, and it's hard and all. And kind of his people have studied it. Finally, 20 minutes before it's due, he said, "We can't figure this out. Let's just bid $10 an acre." So they bid $10 an acre. 3 months later, they get the call back, more data, sharpen your pencil. This goes on for 18 months. And finally, I think $15 an acre he leases. Turns out for 18 months, they were the only ones that had bid. So the government continued through this process.
That's great.
Of all this.
Hey, I got that extra $5 an acre. You know?
Yeah,
there you go.
There you go. So, all right, jump to the Permian.
Let's do it.
What's going on there?
Well, as I mentioned, for the context for the DJ, productivity in the Permian has been dropping for a couple of years. And this is enough that like the Wall Street Journal runs cover stories on it.
Right.
You know,
my mom notices that.
When my dad starts texting me about stuff, you know, it's notable, newsworthy, right? But this has obviously caused some consternation because the Permian produces 5 million barrels a day, and the rest of U.S. shale produces a little over 3. You know, it's more than the DJ, the Bakken, the Eagle Ford, the Anadarko, et cetera, all combined together, right? So it's Permian is king. We all know that. But so if the well's productivity is dropping, that has you worry. And you know when this was happening and people were starting to wrap their heads around it, the big concern was inventory exhaustion. You know, like, have we drilled out the good stuff?
Right.
It was like, is the Permian dead?
Yeah.
And we have spent a lot of time looking at this recently. What we are seeing is that the 2022, 2023 wells, they actually look just as good or better than 2018 or 2019. And I think a lot of the drop that we've seen over the past 2 years there, 10% or so, is because operators really high-graded their inventory during the low-price regime of COVID and its aftermath. Okay. So they stopped drilling the tier 3 stuff. It wasn't a question of like running out of tier 1. It was more, they stopped drilling tier 3. And then when they added it back into their portfolio in 2022, when we had that big recovery, and into 2023, look, lo and behold, production drops back to where it was.
Right.
Which is not to say that the future inventory looks a little worse than what's already been drilled, but it is to say that like this past couple of years drop isn't, I would say, a huge red flag, put up the smoke flare, call up the Saudis and ask them to pump more. It's more just like an artifact of the operator behavior during COVID time.
Okay. So here's my conspiracy theory tinfoil hat on
Love
the
it.
Permian.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of make up all these numbers because I can't remember. It's been a while, and plus I don't have a job anymore, so
Hey,
I don't
why
have
not?
to. I don't have to be right.
Yeah.
Let's go horizontal drilling. We start in the Permian, call it 12, 13, something
Sure.
like that. Boom! Every year we're up 40% in terms of well productivity, right? Then we get to call it 17 and 18, and maybe we're up 15 to 20%. So
Mhm.
in Biden's world, that's inflation decreasing,
Sure.
right? But no, but anyway, and so we still see kind of up to the right, although with slower growth up, and now we're kind of bending back down 10%.
Mhm.
What I think happened is, call it until 2017, you have 5 guys in a rusty pickup truck for the most part drilling. That's cane-backed companies, NGP-backed companies, the entrepreneurial companies,
Yeah.
generally drilling parent-type wells. Generally, the smaller companies are a lot better at optimizing production rates
Yeah.
because we're going to flip, right? We want as high production rates as possible. So we have that. The best acreage in the Permian, Exxon and Chevron sitting there, and they're not doing diddly squat. So they pick it up in 17 and 18 with the best practices. Because I think if you took out the Exxon and Chevron wells drilled in 17 and 18, instead of being up 15 to 20%, it's like down 3%.
Yeah.
So you already saw the breakover. It's masked somewhat by Exxon and Chevron being late to the game. Am I making that up, or is there possibly some truth to that?
I think there might be some truth to that. Like, in addition to just finding that better quality rock as the larger companies start to move more on their positions, we also see that they're drilling longer laterals. 2 guys in a truck might not have bothered to, hey, they're going to flip it anyways. Like, who needs to lease this thing up to fit a 3-mile lateral or whatever it is? And then it does seem like the operators have been getting smarter about their parent-child relationships, and our models are showing like less impact from that, like in the past couple of years compared to before that.
Yeah, because we messed that up early on. Just the whole thing of, gosh, we can't share information with anyone. But I bet if you go back and run your models and you tag out Exxon and Chevron, go look at that. Because I think you're going to see that it actually flattened out early.
Yeah.
And so this decline is to be expected. The reason it kept going was just better rock best practices.
I'll take a look. Yeah.
There you go.
Good theory.
If there's nothing to that, don't mention it ever again.
That's not even that much of a tinfoil hat. That's just a normal beanie right there.
That's just a dude who paid attention.
Come on, give me some Beautygate conspiracy theories, for the Permian. That's a real conspiracy theory. Yeah.
No doubt. We could sit around and say, okay, who's going to buy Endeavor?
Sure.
So there we go. So that's interesting, because if I'm right about my theory of Exxon Chevron getting there late, that actually portends to a steeper drop possibly than maybe what your models are looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Again, how do you see how is your model showing the decline going forward? Because you said it was just a bit of high grading, drilling during COVID, so 10% down to be expected. Are y'all seeing more flattish, or are we up against the brick wall?
We show more flattish. Brick wall would be a little bit later. Yeah, I mean, most of these, I was just looking at the numbers for the Midland earlier today, and most of the operators, especially the large ones, have somewhere between like 4 and 6 years of their better stuff remaining, and then another 6 years of tier 3, tier 4, whatever you want to call it. So I think there's like there's time left to run with stuff kind of holding steady. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what other learnings and what else do we need to know about the Permian?
So the Permian,
but by the way, I mean, Exxon buying Pioneer, the press conference sounded like a Diamondback acquisition from 2017. Longer letters, better completions. We're gonna double the amount of reserves. I'm like, going, what? Pioneer's not that bad. Come on.
For sure. Yeah, they're an excellent operator. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I do think like there is remaining potential for longer and longer laterals. I mean, especially like the more you can eliminate anything short of 12,000 feet, there's still like a lot of meat left on the bone there. I think it remains to be seen on whether or not there's some completion special sauce or EOR or some new method that will like unlock a step change in productivity. Like we'll see whether that happens. But I think the more interesting thing right now is the emergence of all these secondary targets, tertiary targets, whatever you want to call them across the Permian. And like operators in the Midland are back to drilling 30 plus wells in a section,
wow.
Like the cube is back, baby.
Nice.
It's and the way that they're doing it, Chuck, is by spreading that across more zones. So rather than trying to drill, that many wells just in your Wolfcamp A and your Lower Sprayberry or whatever it is, they're adding in Upper Sprayberry, Middle Sprayberry, Joe Mill, Dean, Wolfcamp C, Wolfcamp D. They're maybe staggering some wells where they can in different parts of the Lower Sprayberry. So operators are like really taking the original like cube gospel to heart in doing these very complex three-dimensional developments. And so we're seeing, I think that's part of the reason why parent-child is having a little bit less effect over the past couple of years. But that's also why you're seeing like that significant density. And just to give you some numbers here, in the Midland Basin and in the Delaware Basin, if you add up these secondary zones, like Upper Sprayberry, Wolfcamp D, Dean, like those zones produce more than the Powder River Basin. They're like 350, 400,000 barrels a day. It's like the scraps from the King's Table are a great way to make a nice meal.
Right.
So that's I think the interesting thing about the Permian and why I'm a little more bullish on it to plateau for a long period of time is just the sheer amount of like additional data the additional zones that are out there, like big Barnett piece in Forbes or whatever earlier today. Operators are out there drilling super deep Barnett wells and finding a lot of oil, actually, not just gas in the Permian. So.
Yeah. And, I always come back to, what are we getting? 8% of the oil in place?
Yeah.
10% is amazing if we get that. So, there's a lot of oil left down there.
For sure. Yeah. And I remember, one of some of the more grizzled old geologists at ConocoPhillips back when I was there would always say, hey, 20 years ago, we knew the resource was out there for a few different things. There was oil in the shales. There was methane hydrates. There was immature hydrocarbons like in Utah. And like now we figured out how to produce oil for shales, but there's still, to your point, 90% of that resource is still there, or more. So if ever anybody can figure out how to improve that recovery factor, especially, secondary or tertiary recovery, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of hydrocarbon left to be produced.
One of my largest LPs became my largest LP because we were talking and they just said, hey, I just don't get this. You drill down and you drain a pool and then it's gone. And I go, no, that's not how it works. And I went to the whiteboard and I drew an upside down triangle. And then I drew oil price up along the side. And I said, the higher the oil price does two things. One, it gives me an incentive to go figure out how to make this stuff work. And it gives me the money to invest, to do R&D, to figure out how these two things work.
Yeah.
So I go, we will never, ever run out of oil. Just, I can tell you how much oil is out there and how much is economic. You tell me what the price is going to be. And a light went off and the guy's like, oh, okay. And that's why he invested with us. But yeah,
Yeah. It's just a matter of
$250 oil.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
going to get a lot more of that oil out of place.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 1 trillion barrels of oil lying on the surface in Utah. You just go mine and you go put it in an oven, and it'll come out of the rocks. You know,
Right?
It's just you need it to be $200 to make it that economic. You know, and there's just all sorts of stuff like that out there that with the right price, you can make it work. You know.
So let's talk real rock now.
Okay.
Like super rock, Vaca Muerta.
Yes.
So I'm excited. We've got our libertarian dude.
Yeah.
I'm bummed out though, because here's what's going to happen. He doesn't have any control of the legislative branch of government there. So he's going to get tagged with all the failure, even though none of his policies will be put in place.
Sure.
But if for some reason his policies get in place and we have this libertarian mecca, tell us about that play. Because I believe we talked about this on BDE the other day. Largest number of unconventional wells outside the United States
and Canada. Yeah.
And Canada. Okay.
Yeah. Yes,
they're the 50,
I am
51st state.
Yeah, 51st state. Alberta, 52 BC.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all about a little optimism bubble for Argentina. Like, let's do it. The amazing thing for the Vaca Muerta is the recent wells in the oil window are around 30% more productive than the Permian. You know, the wells are incredible. And on top of that, the wells in the gas window are that much more productive than Appalachia. So imagine having a super Marcellus and a super Wolfcamp in the same basin. You know, It's extraordinary. And this aerial extent of the basin is bigger than the Permian. Or the Eagleford. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's not quite as stacked as the Permian, but it does have many different benches, lots of different tight opportunities and sandstones and siltstones, in addition to the proper shale plays. So I think the basin has almost unlimited potential. It's a question of how scared are operators that they'll get nationalized, which has happened before.
So my prescription is so bad on my eyes that it's illegal for me to get LASIK in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, my eye doctor, who's been my eye doctor for 40 years, has said, I've seen enough data out of Europe with people with your prescription. I'm comfortable if you want to get LASIK. And I go, really? I got to fly to Europe? And he goes, no. We just go down to Mexico and right across the border, we have an office.
Amazing.
And you go get LASIK done and it'll be my partner. He flies down with you from Houston and we get it done. And he goes, you want to do it? And I said, no way. And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, imagine me starting the sentence. I got my eyes cut on in Mexico and now I can't see. I mean, who doesn't say no shit to that, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, Argentina.
So, there's political risk.
A little political risk.
Costs have been historically higher there, although I think from what I've been seeing in IR decks is they've been coming down quite a bit, which is good news for obviously the economics of those wells. But then you have issues around offtake, especially for the gas.
I've heard the pipeline situation, regulatory wise, is just a mess. And
it's one of those things that if you can figure it out, you can power Buenos Aires, you can power Chile, you can power Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo on clean gas from that southern cone just coming from the Vaca Muerta. If you just put in the pipes, like not to mention LNG.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, again, it's one of those things that go raise a big, huge fund. We're going to invest there. We lose all our money when it gets nationalized.
Yeah.
Duh. Should have thought it. But that'll be interesting to watch because, I mean, he's talking a good game. He's talking about we're going to sell this off and, we're going to free up drilling. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I really hope he's able to be successful with all that because the potential's there. And I mean, that's the key basin, but there's other interesting basins there. There's, offshore is also interesting there after all this stuff in Namibia coming up. It's, I don't know if you've been following that, but there's billion barrel discoveries going on in Namibia and, it's right across the conjugate margin. What used to be connected to Namibia is offshore Argentina, offshore Uruguay. Like it's all that, like that whole trend, like southern Africa, going from South Africa up to Namibia, used to be connected to that eastern part of southern South America. So, I mean,
I love our analogy is literally in a different hemisphere. Is that a different other side of the world?
Yeah.
Here's our analogy.
Hey, this is thinking like a geologist, you know?
I used to be scared 2 offsets away. That's how old I am in my career. Yeah, we can't move over there.
Yeah. Well, you know, Guyana used to be offshore, used to be the same geology as like offshore Ghana, and those where you had all those initial discoveries in that kind of that coast of Africa, west of Nigeria. So that was a lot of the reason for them to go explore in Guyana was knowing that 200 million years ago they were in the same place.
Nice. Crazy. There's something going on in the Uinta? I haven't heard about this.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I love the Uinta. It's an incredible basin. So
is that the waxy crude?
It's waxy, dude. Yeah. So I'll give you the good news and the bad news. So the good news, the wells are as productive as the Permian. And if you get the crude to market, because it's waxy and can be more easily turned into lubricants and other like higher value added petrochemicals, you actually get a positive differential relative to WTI. And it has in addition to just really productive wells, it has stacked pay. So it's not just one zone. There's a number of zones to target there. It has a pretty small footprint, so like it's not going to be another. It's never going to produce 5 million barrels a day, but it's been like going up like crazy. I think the unconventionals there are now through 100,000 barrels a day, and it's not there. There's this kind of common misconception that I think has maybe delayed or hindered capital getting into the basin, which is that you can't get the crude out of the basin. But in reality, you can truck it out to rail terminals. It's just you got to truck it farther than you would like. And they're getting approvals for building more rail terminals and rail outlets that'll improve the transportation costs even more. But it's really fantastic. You've got companies like XCL and Ovintiv and the Javelin team out there like drilling really nice wells.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm blanking, but there used to be, I think, 2 publicly traded Petroglyph, maybe, and something else. And we used to, it seems like we would look at it and pitch it as an acquisition target to somebody, and they'd spend a lot of time, and then ultimately got scared because there were the 2 refiners in Salt Lake City that refined it. They're about full. No, we can't do it anymore. Yeah. But no, that's wild to hear. All right. Give me a really, really cool story about working with a client, and then I'm gonna ask you the flip side of it too. Just when you're celebrating a little too much, I'll ask you the horror story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll give you a cool story, and I'm gonna anonymize this because I don't have permission to share the full thing. But we had a client in the Permian who was using our models, and our models were saying that there was a primary zone that they were targeting, and our models were saying, hey, the geology of the zone above really matters to your primary zone. And they're like, that doesn't make sense. It's all filled with water. Like why would it matter?
Yeah.
And it just kept showing up in the model results. And then they went and looked at some more of the data, and they found, hey, actually our wells that are drilled near the top of our primary zone are the best wells. Like that doesn't make sense. Fracs normally grow up, and they're growing up into more water. Mystery, right? Well, they went back and looked at their data and went back all the way to core, and they found, oh, lo and behold, it's not full of water, it's full of oil. And the models had kind of learned that just by looking at the data and seeing these relationships. And so after finding that out, this company started targeting that zone specifically, and it became some of their most productive inventory. So like huge uplift to their NAV from, I don't know, bumping their locations 10 or 15% by finding this new zone, like thanks to the models, finding this unexpected kind of insight, if you will.
It's interesting that you say is when you look at our track record over funds 4, 5, 6, and 7, generally speaking, we got better over that time. And why we got better was not because our best deals got better. They kind of stayed the same. It's that our worst deals, we spent less money on. So one, we learned to cut bait earlier. And two, it was exactly what you were saying, being more just agnostic to whatever and just looking at data and figuring out. Because the thing you forget about the shale revolution is it shouldn't have even worked. If all the the traditional beliefs, it was literally, let's go down there. Let's frack. Who the hell had the balls to do the first fine mesh sand frack, right?
I know, amazing.
Now we're just going to gum up the reservoir. Why are we doing this? Lo and behold, look at how it works. So,
I like to think about that. The tools that we have for producing conventionals are over 100 years old. And I think about that a lot for like geological evaluations. We have very well-defined processes and ways of estimating reserves and risk and all that type of stuff that are like super well defined for conventionals. And then you get to unconventionals and we struggle even just building a physical model that will like replicate more than a single well at a time. And so it's like how much more is out there that we don't know yet, so I think that humility and just, all right, let's just start from the ground up with an open mind is
only change one variable.
Yeah.
Only change one variable. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's crazy. Now give us a horror story.
Man, so we have you could call this a recurring nightmare. Maybe is what you want to call it. So, we've been in business now for 8 or 9 years, I guess. I've been there for 4. And so we've worked with, operators in every major shale play. And two things we hear over and over again. I'll give you some specific examples for each, but like one of them is we'll be in the pre-sales process and they're like super enthusiastic and they are gung-ho and ready to get started and start using this new ML stuff. The board is supportive. Like, let's go, dude. And we're like, great. So once you give us your data, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks to get get stuff up and running or whatever it is. And this is faster now, but we'd say something like that. They'd be like, great, our data is in excellent shape. You'll have it on day 2. We're like, fantastic. Right. And then like 6 months later, still don't have any data. And this happens over and over again. And this is just so much potential there for operators to clean up their act, where they just, the completions data is stuck in some database and they don't know where their cluster data is, and their production data, we only have monthlies. We don't know where the dailies are. We lost the data from that company that we acquired. And like next thing you know, we have to end up using our public data because even a big sophisticated operator just like doesn't have their data anywhere. So that's part of the reason we have this data offering in the first place. Second horror story.
I totally believe that. Yeah. That it's stunning to me that you walk in and there's like a paper ledger with production data. Yeah. You're like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know. Tammy's the only one who knew where that is. She's gone now.
She's gone now. No, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I've heard that a million times. The other horror story, and this happens again all the time, is, they'll say, well, how accurate are your models at forecasting production, Ted? We'll be like, usually, once we get them fine-tuned and everything, for most wells, they'll be, 15 to 20% like or less, off from what the well production is. And they'll go, that's terrible. Like, how can it be so inaccurate? We go, well, hey, why don't we do a little test here? And we'll, let's go find, you guys did some AFEs back in 2021, a budget cycle. Like, why don't we take your reservoir engineering pre-drill type curves and just put it to the test?
Yeah.
And, we had an operator once who over forecasted their whole basin production by 50%, for a 2-year period. How do you think that impacted their IRRs and so many wells that didn't end up paying out because they had, over forecasted that badly? And we've seen the opposite too, by the way, companies that under forecast all their wells by 30%. And that's because maybe they had the opposite cultural pressure where every well should be exceeding your forecast. So nobody wants to, say that a well is going to produce whatever 700K barrels, and it comes in at 600, right?
Yeah. No, that's not surprising. So let's close out on this, because it is all the buzz these days. And, this is wild. We actually at Digital Wildcatters, and we built this internally for our own use. We have an AI-driven search model.
Great.
For all of our podcasts, all our presentations at Energy Tech Night, and index stuff. You can literally type in, Colin's face, and it'll pull up everywhere Colin's face is. You can type. So anyway, I have gone in the last 9 months from saying Google is the greatest website ever invented to it sucks. I have to read these articles and all this stuff. So give me AI stuff about, you've kind of through all this talked about what it's done to date. So maybe you can summarize that if you want, but I also want to hear where it's going.
Yeah. Well, the biggest developments recently are in these large language models that do really good jobs at handling text, or there are similar type models that do really great with imagery or other kind of visual data. And I think there's a couple pieces of real potential there for the oil and gas space. Those new, ChatGPT and all those things, honestly, it actually doesn't affect what we do that much. If you're just forecasting how much a well is going to produce, those aren't really applicable. But there is tremendous potential for digitizing old data. Back to our previous conversation, these models are great at image recognition, and you got some paper logs that nobody ever scanned that's in the bottom of a filing cabinet, that smells. No problem. Yeah. Like, just run it through. You can do a much better job of digitizing all that.
So this is great. Just a side note, because it's a funny story, because you're so young. I feel as the old guy in the room, I need to share.
Yeah.
Back in, call it, late 90s, there was a company called A2D, analog to digital. And basically they would digitize paper well logs, and literally by hand scanning it to, do you know where the guy found his best employees?
No, where's that?
Nail salons. The ladies that did nails were the best at tracing the well logs.
Wow.
And had the most
excellent motor control.
Excellent motor control.
Fine attention to detail.
Isn't that crazy?
That's
fantastic. But that's how we used to do it back in the late 90s.
Hey, I believe it. Yeah. That's great. And then I think the other, Google's becoming obsolete to you. I'm finding myself going to ChatGPT for a lot of my research questions now at this point as well. And I think you'll see companies, and a lot of them are already going after this, kind of like you guys are doing for all your content, do the same thing for their everything that they have across their enterprise, PowerPoint presentations, GIS documents, images, like PDFs, all that type of stuff. And, I remember back in when I was getting started in the industry, there was this whole great crew change. It was this whole meme that all the boomers are going to retire and we're going to have to hand the keys over to Gen X and the millennials. And like, what are we going to do with all that knowledge being lost? And I think we kind of forgot about that just because we had bigger fish to fry. Like, how do we stay in business?
Yeah. Minus $37 oil. Yeah.
Yeah. We were happy to do a great crew change because we, it meant we had fewer employees or whatever it is. But that's still a big deal, especially as we have to return to the offshore or return to conventionals for, the next 20 million barrels of production growth globally, right? And I think these models will play a huge role in that.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. It's been fun to watch and amazing to watch. And it feels like, I know it's, the overnight discovery that's been worked on for 20 some odd years, but still, it's been amazing. So Ted, how do people reach you if they want to chat?
Yes, a couple different ways. You can find me on LinkedIn, Ted Cross. You can find me on Twitter at Ted Cross, or shoot me a message, tcross@novilabs.com for an email. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Ted, you were cool to come on.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Really appreciate it.
Hey, one thing we didn't talk about, and I don't know if this even matters, is one of the bigger than I expected variables, maybe that's the way to put it, was actually figuring out artificial lift after the fact.
Yeah.
Because it felt like in the Bakken, fuck, really? The jet pump burned out again? What are we going to do now? We'll go to a rod pump. Oh, shit. It just went down 30 barrels a day. What? But it's going to be flatter.
Yeah.
Do you see any of that in your data?
So, yeah, that's something that we really don't do too much with because the data quality for that stuff is terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it's really terrible. So, it's hard to find that good quality data publicly, and then it's hard to find it like as a good across the well life. And then companies are like, yeah, we want to do an artificial lift study. We're like, great, like let's start next week. And then they give us the data and it's in terrible shape.
Yeah.
So there are companies out there who who work in that space, but that's one of the big unknowns to our models, that like one day if we had all that data, it'd be fantastic, and you can probably optimize a lot more production there.
Yeah, no, and we had a couple of companies that were really, really good at watching that and documenting it, and in effect using human intelligence to kind of watch it. But even those guys would get surprised. Man, it just looks like at 18 months it runs out and we got to go to a rod pump or whatever. And I mean, we wound up having, and we drilled a lot of, I don't even think the guys would mind if I mentioned their names because they did a great job. The Kraken guys in the Bakken. I mean, they've drilled as many wells as anybody up there, and they're really smart. They're really good. I mean, we wound up having multiple type curves over time, and it was all artificial lift driven. It wasn't rock, it wasn't completion, it wasn't any of that. It was literally just figuring out where do you change out the pumps. So
it's a huge deal, definitely.
Ted, you were cool to come on.
Yeah, my pleasure.